Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Bird.
And I'm Steve Bird.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. So, you may have noticed, everyone, that I introduced myself with my first and last name. That's always an indication that I've been working on other podcasts in which I don't have the same last name as the other host. I have huge news, everyone. I have another podcast, a third podcast, one might say. I have a new podcast called A Good Story Well Told with co-host Jonathan Auxier, acclaimed children's novelist. This is basically taking the place of the Secrets of Story podcast, which I've had running for 8 years. Now, instead of doing the Secrets of Story podcast with James Kennedy, I'm going to be doing A Good Story Well Told with Jonathan Auxier, which will be a similar podcast, but will be a little more focused. In the first season, we have 2 episodes that have launched. By the time you're hearing this, there will be at least a third episode out there. What we're doing for the first season is we are doing the shame shelf, where we are shaming each other into reading or seeing things that we have never read or seen. Well, our first episode was a get to know you episode. Our second episode, he shames me into finally reading the novel The Giver. In our third episode, I shame him into finally seeing the movie Vertigo. Those 3 episodes are all available now. In our fourth episode, he's going to shame me into seeing the movie Treasure Planet. So that's coming up soon. And then we're going to get around to some comics, I think. I'm going to shame him into reading V for Vendetta after that. So this is all very exciting. I invite anyone who enjoys this podcast to go listen to A Good Story Well Told and like and subscribe to it, please.
Yes, and I have listened to your introductory episode. Then I started listening to your Shame Shelf episode, and I was like, oh, maybe this is going to be an interesting story. And then there was like a big spoiler right at the very beginning for that story. So I'm like, oh, maybe I'll hold off on listening to the rest of this episode.
Yeah, well, I had certainly had that spoiled before I read it, and I still was able to enjoy it. Yeah, it's a very short book. Go ahead and give it a shot. But we'd better get to some comics tonight. Folks, the plan here is to cover more comics tonight than we have ever covered before in one episode. By quite a bit, because this is our annuals episode. We decided not to do it with a guest this year. They put out 4 annuals for the first time this year, and for the first time, they have no reprints. So it says on the cover of every one, all new, not a single reprint. And hoo boy, they are not lying. Every one of these issues has 55 pages of original content. Steve, how flabbergasted, bowled over were you by all this avalanche of content?
Well, as I've mentioned before, I am most likely quite dyslexic, so I find things that I am excited to read much easier to read. For the annuals episode here, I found reading most of these to be relatively a slog, and so it took me longer than usual to get through them. Hopefully, we can take the sloggy parts and go ahead and condense some of that stuff and make it a little bit more enjoyable for the reader. Okay, so we haven't really discussed what order we're doing these things in or who's taking what when, but I wouldn't mind going first.
Okay, I'm down with that. Let's do Daredevil Annual number 1.
All right, so Daredevil Special, all new, not a single reprint. It's 25 cents, so it's just over twice the price of a regular monthly issue. King size special, they don't use the word annual here. Here comes Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, and the Man Without Fear is almost being covered up partially by Electro and his Emissaries of Evil. And I didn't remember that the Emissaries of Evil came originally from Daredevil here. They have different lineups in the future that aren't as Daredevil focused. Featuring a 39-page slam bang action thriller, plus features, pinups, and a mixed up meeting with Stan and Jean, which I am very excited to talk about. That is by far my favorite part of this whole issue.
Yes. So this is fascinating. One of the all-time great Marvel comics was Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1, where Spider-Man fought 6 of his greatest villains who teamed up. You look at this cover and you're like, well, this is clearly an homage to Spider-Man Annual number 1. Clearly they are saying, let's go ahead and have fun like we did with Spider-Man Annual number 1. But there's just slightly something off about everything. Obviously, the big thing that's off is that Daredevil has a much lamer rogues gallery than Spider-Man does. But also, one of the things that really annoys me about this issue is certainly Gene Colan, a big fan of splash pages, but they don't recreate the thing they do in that issue of giving him one big splash page fighting each villain. This issue could have felt more like an homage and less like a ripoff of Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1. And I wish it had been more of a conscious homage.
So you wanted it to be more derivative.
Well, I feel like if it had been more derivative, it would have been less derivative, if that makes any sense. I feel like if it was like, hey, everybody, join us for our special tribute to Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1 issue, rather than just like, Let's see what we can do to make this somewhat similar without everybody noticing.
Right. And Gene Colan either really does not care in this issue or was really super rushed and just had to really fit it into his schedule, because he is not doing a stellar job in this issue. Starting with the cover, look at Stiltman at the bottom of that cover.
Stiltman doesn't look so bad to me.
Okay, fine. Well, we start out with Daredevil working out in his home gym, once again talking about things not working out, and I don't know how much of this is Gene Colan and how much of this is John Tartaglione, but on page 2, panel 1, as he's starting to towel off, it looks like somebody or something wearing an ill-fitting human suit. Those muscles in the torso and chest just do not really correspond very well to actual human muscles.
Go ahead and do the credits.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. DD's Most Dangerous Adventure by Stan the Man Lee and Gene the Dean Colan, embellished by John Tartaglione, lettered by Sam Rosen. We learn that at this point, Daredevil owns the entire brownstone that he lives in here, I don't know if it's a brownstone, the entire townhome that he lives in, which I don't believe was true earlier. I think they made it clear that he was either owning or renting 2 units, one right above the other, and the one below was his secret gym, and the one above was his private residence. Here, they make it clear he owns this entire building. Page 4, panel 3, and we see this elsewhere in the issue as well. It's got this little, what do you call this architectural feature, where it's got a little bump out.
Yeah, there's a name for that, but I don't know what it is.
It's almost kind of like a second-story bay window that's more square. Right? Yeah. If we can describe that, which I find architecturally interesting. Anyway, he goes out for a patrol. He happens to happen upon Electro and the Matador, with Electro recruiting Matador into his new emissaries of evil, and they're going to go out and fight Daredevil, and it just so happens Daredevil runs into them while they are having this conversation in the middle of a city street. So
just atrocious plotting. The whole value of a story in which the bad guys are coming after the good guys is that you don't have to come up with a way for the good guys to stumble across the bad guys, because the bad guys are coming for the good guy. So this is an unforced error. You don't need to have Daredevil just stumble across Electro and the Matador plotting against him.
Yes. So Matador and Electro are able to subdue Daredevil, and once again, atrocious plotting. Matador says, but why not finish him off now while we have the chance? Electro says, and cut short our revenge? No, that would be too quick, too easy. You guys. But Daredevil
your whole plan, what you've been working for months now, seemingly, is to get Daredevil, and you've got him. So the story is over. But no, let's go ahead and see if we can release him and then get him again later. It is atrocious.
Well, the story's over on page 10 when Daredevil breaks his neck in that last panel there.
Yeah.
He's stunned from the electricity and lands in a fall that would clearly break his neck. It's just like, oh, look, he was able to put his hand in between his face and the roof, and that's what saved him. So he basically is dazed and has to walk home. Of course, he's like, oh, I have this whole building to myself, so it's secret. And then he just walks in his own front door as Daredevil. So we see Gladiator being brought to the States. We see that Electro rescued Stiltman from the river when he had fallen in there. And on page 13, panel 2, is it just me, or does the Stiltman's helmet make it look like he's some kind of like baby squid?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that they do remember that the Gladiator was last seen working for the Mafia in Sicily. And so they have him flying home, implying he still has that job. This is just bizarre, where Electro has seemingly fished a drowned and possibly dead Stiltman out of the river. Certainly everybody assumed he was going to die when last we saw him. And then he seems to bring him back to life like Frankenstein. He's got him in a Gothic castle, and he's got him hooked up to a slab with electricity in the air being funneled into him. This is now Franken-Stiltman.
Yeah. Daredevil calls into the office and says he isn't going to be in today. He goes around and he's like, well, they're looking for me, so I'm going to go make myself visible, so maybe they will come out of hiding. And he goes down to the docks, and it works with the Matador, who is a real super dick to the guy who owns the boat that he was hiding on. He says, and this is your payment for allowing me to hide upon your boat as I waited for this moment. Well, he kicks the guy. They have a fight. The Matador just ends up getting thrown into the water off the dock. Daredevil's swinging around, and there are 3 different panels in this issue where Daredevil's shadow on a building is way larger than Daredevil himself.
Yeah.
Page 20, panel 1, it looks like somebody's got a spotlight on the building that's down on the bottom left corner shining up at him. That's the only way you could get that shadow. We see that Daredevil takes some quote-unquote nutrient capsules.
Not nutrient, nutriment, whatever that means.
Nutriment capsules. Well, I mean, it's Benzedrine. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
No,
it looks really bad to see him go like, oh, it's a good thing I've got this little packet of uppers clicked into my belt and I can just pop it off. And, he's clearly taking some uppers that he keeps in a little capsule on his belt.
Yeah, and comics artists often would be taking various sorts of uppers in order to get all their deadlines done. So it could be Gene Colan's just like, oh yeah, so this is just what you do, right? Daredevil runs into Stiltman. Well, they did get one splash page here with Stiltman, but it wasn't the one where Stiltman's being defeated, which would make it more like the Spider-Man issue that you want it to be more like. Daredevil quickly disposes with Stiltman, ends up hitting some kind of button on his costume that extends his legs without his knowledge and shoves him through a brick wall. Fortunately, he is wearing armor, so I can kind of buy it in this case. Daredevil stumbles home after this and finds that there is an audio tape that has been shoved under his door or through a mail slot or something like that. He goes and puts it in his little dictaphone player and says, "Tried to phone you, Matt, but you were out. Just wanted to warn you that Stiltman has been sighted in the city, so don't come to the office alone. Call us first." I guess this is what you did before answering machines. You just went ahead and dropped an audio tape off at the person's home.
Yeah.
So,
and why is he warning Matt instead of warning, say, Mike, Matt's twin brother, who is actually Daredevil as far as Foggy knows? I don't know. Possibly because he has no idea where Mike lives. Possibly because Mike doesn't exist, which Foggy can't figure out.
Yes. Daredevil goes out for a walk in his civilian identity in presumably Central Park here. Is making it clear that he's just he's going to get some sun. He's always out in the nighttime as a superhero. He's going to go ahead and get some sun and a nice walk out in the park and have nothing to do with his superhero getup. But then he figures out that somehow Leapfrog just happens to be there, who obviously isn't there for Daredevil, or if he is, he doesn't know Daredevil's around. It just so happens that he runs into him. Matt turns into Daredevil, or is it Mike turns into Daredevil? Matt turns into Daredevil, quickly dispenses with Leapfrog, but then he figures out that Leapfrog is trying to lead him to whatever location the emissaries of evil are going to have their final showdown. So he pretends that he is falling for the trap, follows him along, and they end up at a power station for whatever reason. At this point, the whole emissaries of evil all come out to fight him at once. We have a big old fight scene. In the end, Daredevil ends up tying all of them up with some sort of an electrified cable, which will somehow neutralize Electro's electrical powers without electrocuting everybody else.
Well, I think it will shock everybody else. I think he's like, now he says... I'm attaching the other end of the wire to the power transformer in such a way that Electro's powers will shock the rest of you into submission. Okay, I see, yes. Yeah.
With nothing but his own muscle to rely on, Electro will never get out of that rope himself. In the end, Matt comes back into the office. He is pretending to bumble around and not know where things are, even though probably a blind man who comes into his very own office would know his way around very easily. And he's thinking, oh, well, I can't be with Karen even though I'm in love with her. And then we get one more giant shadow at the end. But this one, I think, works very much metaphorically as opposed to the others that looked like they were literal.
But this whole thing makes no sense. He comes into his office and is like, oh, I'm stumbling around. I don't know where the file cabinets are. It's like, well, you should know that by now, or you should at least be able to feel your way around. They're like, oh, you're so blind, Matt. And then he picks up a piece of paper and says, hey, you still haven't filed this brief. Like, okay, Matt, that's something that you would not be able to do if you were blind. You would not be able to pick up a piece of paper and go, hey, this piece of paper is out of place, unless you ask them, what's this piece of paper? Matt, you are the world's worst secret identity having person. Nope, I can't come up with a better term than secret identity having person.
Spider-Man is really the only one who really seems to care about his secret identity.
Yes. Oh, I should point out that we almost got through the whole annual without mentioning Mike, which is my least favorite aspect of Daredevil. Again, he pretends to be his own twin brother, Mike, and pretends that Mike is Daredevil. But then finally on the last page, Matt explains his absence this whole issue by saying he was at Mike's. And they're like, oh, okay, could we ever see you and Mike together? Where does Mike live? Tell us more about Mike. But no, they don't ask. And so Mike does get mentioned, unfortunately, at the end. And he also shows up in the back matter. Should we move on to the back matter?
Let's go ahead and do that. So, inside Daredevil, we've got a little montage page here. Number 1, Dee Dee's riotous radar sense. Dee Dee's titanic sense of touch, and it shows that he can read a book just with his fingers, even through his gloves, which that last part is a little bit of that's a bridge too far for me. I can buy it with the bare fingers, but through his gloves. Then Dee Dee's built-in lie detector, that he can hear someone's heartbeat and know when they're lying. We then have another little feature, an explanation, where we see both Matt and Mike on the first page. We see him breaking the fourth wall, talking to us, explaining who Mike Murdock is. We get a pinup of Karen Page, which is nice enough. We get a pinup of Foggy Nelson, Kazar on another splash page, outside of his English manner with Zabu there. We get another little pinup of Daredevil. We then see pinups of his bad guys. We then get more information about the Billy Club. We now get on to the one part of this issue that I really, really find fascinating. So this is At the Stroke of Midnight, a daringly different dramatic featurette in answer to virtually no requests from anyone at all. We start out with Gene Colan driving through a snowstorm towards, says, wait, that house, looming ahead like an eerie edifice of evil. It means I've made it. And it turns out that he has come to Stan Lee's house, an eerie edifice of evil.
Yes.
And he's there to drop off some pages. Stan Lee himself is like, why didn't you mail them? But he gives Gene a cup of coffee and says, hope you're enjoying that Java. It'll cost you a dime. Then the next day, Gene comes to the offices, and he is hoping that Stan Lee isn't there. He's dreading talking to the guy. But then he says, oh, no, I can hear him snoring in his office from out here. Stan Lee scrambles, apparently, behind his desk before Gene can actually get the door open, and is ready to plot out the next issue. Meanwhile, he is calling Gene, baby, when he objects, says, okay, then let's get started, sweetie. Says, let's go back to baby. We see Stan belittling, humiliating, treating his artist like a bully, basically.
Well, and more importantly, not doing the writing.
Yeah, and then so they're having the story conference, and Stan is just throwing out some little ideas. Says, dig this, Dee Dee's on top of the tallest mountain in Tibet. And Gene is like, how did he get up there? Stan's like, you figure that out. He's there to rescue the poor, helpless, lovely, screaming Karen, who's been captured by Baron Zemo. But Baron Zemo's dead. How can we bring him back to life? Don't worry, you'll think of something. It says, sheesh, this is some great plot you're giving me. Please don't embarrass me with your overwhelming gratitude. I'd do as much for any of our artists. He says, no wonder they're all nervous wrecks.
But even in terms of plotting, the whole session begins with, let's get started, Gene, sweetie. And Gene says, look, if you're supposed to be the writer, how about you dreaming up the plot just once? And Stan says, you want me to waste all my brain power on just plain ordinary thinking? And so, this is like every negative knock on Stan Lee you hear today,
yes,
right here on the page in Daredevil Annual number 1.
Yes, I find this utterly fascinating.
Yes.
It seems to me that Stan thinks that this is self-deprecating humor. But I think that any of the other artists at Marvel might be looking at this and having a laugh of bitter irony,
yes,
when looking at this thing. And for any of Stan's critics to this day, I'm surprised they don't reference this story more often. I mean, maybe it's because it's in this otherwise utterly forgettable annual issue that people aren't as aware of it. But yeah, I am fascinated by this entire thing.
I think that it's a shame Tartaglione inked this issue. He's obviously become the permanent inker on Daredevil. This whole issue would have been much more gorgeous with Giacoya inks or Tom Palmer when he finally arrives, as he's going to arrive, I think, within the next year. But Cohen does an okay job on this issue. Stanley, to the degree that he is doing the plotting, although I guess based on the back, he probably isn't, but to the degree that whoever is doing the plotting, Lee or Cohen, this issue is just atrociously plotted. Pretty much a disaster.
So why don't you move on to a book of your choice?
So we should say, with Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 4, we thought about not doing it in this episode because this issue has a surprise penciler, and I'm going to go ahead and ruin the surprise. They don't reveal until the end of the issue who the surprise penciler is, and presumably co-plotter, and that is Larry Lieber, who has returned to working for Marvel superhero comics. He's been off doing Western comics for a while, and he makes his riotous return to superhero comics here. But the thing is, Larry Lieber is still alive and is currently on a book tour promoting his new novel that he wrote, Chirps. So we thought, wouldn't it be great to get Larry Lieber on the show? I did some more research on Larry Lieber. He led just a massive, interesting Marvel career. He gets co-creator credit on Iron Man, Thor, and Ant-Man. And I found out that he actually, from scratch, created the names Don Blake, Tony Stark, and Hank Pym. You know, you may have wondered, why aren't those names alliterative? We've got Peter Parker, Matt Murdock, Reed Richards, Sue Storm. How come Don Blake, Tony Stark, and Hank Pym aren't alliterative? Well, because they weren't created by Stan. They were created by Larry. Anyway, so
interesting.
If you were out there, Larry Lieber, we would love to have you on as a guest. That would be the get of all time. We contacted him. We found what we thought was his email address and emailed him and have not heard back.
And one thing I have to say is I realized kind of too late that guest of the show, Riley Brown, was also going to be at the same convention as Larry Lieber this past weekend. And I could have asked Riley if he might have gone and encouraged Larry to come on our podcast. But I didn't think of it until too late.
Well, if we hear back from Larry Lieber, then we will be cutting this entire discussion of this annual and discussing it with him instead. But let's assume that we are never going to hear back from Larry Lieber, that we can go ahead and have an open and honest discussion about this issue, and we will just regret that we never got to meet with him. So let's go ahead and do the Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 4. Once again, all new, not a single reprint, a whole 55 pages of content, an all new 41-page epic battle starring Spidey and the Torch, the Web and the Flame, plus featured surprises and 2 great mysterious guest villains. So we have this very interesting conceit to the issue where they are not going to tell us who the penciler is. I think that this is because Larry Lieber has rededicated himself to doing superhero comics with a bit more oomph than he was doing them before. And I think that they have a sense that we would be prejudiced against the comic if they told us up front it was being penciled by Larry Lieber. And instead they want to go like, no, look at these pencils. They're really good. And then at the end going like, surprise, it was Larry Lieber. Because Larry Lieber, we've seen doing various Marvel comics before now. As I said, he was the scripter on a lot of legendary Marvel comics, which is why even in the MCU movies, a lot of them say co-created by Larry Lieber for these characters who he originally scripted. But he also did some art. He did one of my favorite early Marvel comics, which was Uatu the Watchers comic in Tales of Suspense. I was a big fan of those comics. I would certainly be wanting to talk about those with Larry Lieber if he appeared. But I think in the time he's been away, he's been getting better. Of course, Larry Lieber's greatest contribution artistically to Marvel Comics is that at some point in the 80s, he takes over the Spider-Man comic strip. And then he draws the Spider-Man comic strip for about 20 years, I think, from the 80s to the aughts, and does a great job. So this is sort of a tryout for that here, as this is the first time he's really drawn Spider-Man, who he would draw this legendary run on in the comic strip. So anyway, we have the Web and the Flame. Spider-Man is swinging across town when suddenly he runs into Human Torch robbing an armored car. And he's like, oh, I got to stop him. They get in a big fight. They fight for several pages. Lieber is really channeling his inner Romita here to a certain extent. Yeah. Really nice art on page 6 of Spider-Man ripping off a fire hydrant and the water shooting up to hit Human Torch.
Yeah, I was going to call out page 6 as well. It's really nicely done.
So they go back and forth for a long time when finally on page 8, it turns out that Human Torch was filming a movie this whole time, which of course that's not how movies work. You don't go through and do 30 actions in a row while filming a movie. You know, it's strictly broken up, especially an action sequence, shot by shot by shot, takes several days to shoot. You don't do the whole thing at one time. But anyway, we have a film director named Bellini, which is sort of a humorous joke here and on the Italian director Federico Fellini. But here we have Bellini, which is a type of alcoholic drink.
It's a peach cocktail.
Peach cocktail. Peter Parker sells some pictures to J. Jonah Jameson. Then he hears a tired old trope that we've already seen done twice in Marvel Comics, where someone supposedly is running a movie studio and wants him to come out and star in a movie where he's going to fight the Torch. We've already seen this in Spider-Man number 13. We've seen this in Fantastic Four number 9. And here it happens again. Once again, he's like, I've never heard of this movie studio, but it's got to be legit. What are the odds that a supervillain would start a movie studio just to grab me? Well, the odds are high. So then he arrives in Hollywood. There's people dressed up for gladiator movies and caveman movies, and I guess a Western movie. So then that's Rawhide Kid, who I guess Larry has been doing the art of. So that's a little in-joke. He then the next day meets up with Human Torch as they go to their set to shoot their movie. And then suddenly the Human Torch seemingly goes crazy on set and is really attacking Spider-Man. And Spider-Man has to fight him. There's good use of movie studio set props that they're using to fight each other here for several pages. He finally is like, I have to stop the Torch, goes to the Torch's trailer to go meet him. And the Torch is like, what do you mean? I haven't been there fighting you. We finally find out what's going on page 19 of this very long story, where we find out that this was the most famous Human Torch impersonator we've seen so far in Marvel Comics. This is the Wizard with his little Human Torch suit that he likes to fly around in. And we see a flashback to when he went ahead and got hooked up with Mysterio, the Spider-Man villain. So we've got a Torch villain and a Spider-Man villain. When they decide to do the easiest plan in the world to defeat the good guys, start a movie studio. That's something that's easy to do.
Yes.
Now they've got Human Torch and Spider-Man fighting each other again. Spider-Man says, come on outside, hothead, where I can mop up the whole landscape with you. And Human Torch says, it'll be a pleasure, loudmouth. You got about as much chance against my flame as Woody Allen would have against the Hulk. Well, you may think like, oh, that's a little awkward to have a Woody Allen reference in this issue. Well, wait just a second, buddy, because that's one of 2 Woody Allen references in this issue. You know, we think of Woody Allen as being like, oh, he was a famous, film writer, director who got his start in the 70s. But in 1960s comics, Woody Allen is all over them, even though he was basically just a nightclub comic at the time. But he was apparently a nationally famous nightclub comic to the extent where he gets mentioned twice in this issue and appears on camera later.
Or at least a New York City. I think that Stan Lee, like many New Yorkers, had a very New York-centric viewpoint. So I think that if he was big in New York, then it ends up showing up in the comics.
Yeah, it's quite odd. So then this issue is just basically, if you like seeing Spider-Man and the Human Torch wailing on each other through a series of misunderstandings, then you are in luck, because we are on page 24, and that has basically been what has been taking us the whole issue. Finally, they realize who the bad guys are. Finally, they decide to start fighting Mysterio and the Wizard. They fight back and forth for several pages. Always fun Mysterio stuff where you're unwittingly finding illusions of him and stuff like that. They had a lot of fun with that in the MCU. The issue really should be over on page 30 or so. No comic should ever last longer than 30 pages. But instead, the Wizard and Mysterio get away, and soon, next thing you know, Human Torch and Spider-Man find themselves fighting a giant robot gorilla for no purpose whatsoever. A very long fight against a giant robot gorilla. They finally take it out. They finally catch up with Mysterio and the Wizard again, and they defeat them, we will just say. And that is basically the end of the issue. That then Spider-Man is flying home and falls asleep on the plane, and the stewardess thinks he must have had too much sightseeing in Hollywood. I guess he's the type that tires easily. Says, we don't know about Pete, but after writing 41 pages, we're kind of bushed ourselves, so enough said. The end. You and me both, Stan. Spider-Man is tired from fighting for 41 pages. You are tired from scripting 41 pages. And who boy are we tired from reading 41 pages. This issue was way too long. The art, yes. Very nice surprise from Larry Lieber. Nice art. Larry, if you're out there, please come on the show. But this is Larry Lieber very much channeling John Romita. Indeed, the Spider-Man newspaper strip would be started by John Romita and then would have its longest run by Larry Lieber. So he would be channeling John Romita there as well. And he does a good job doing it. What are your thoughts on the main story in this issue, Steve?
Well, I mean, yeah, it was a rehash of plots we've already seen that was dragged out way too long. Also, I've never really gotten the whole Spider-Man and Human Torch thing that they've been doing this whole time. It's just never really worked for me. I'll just go through little individual things that jumped out at me. First of all, page 12, where we are seeing the actors being made up as the aliens for the upcoming scene. Final panel at the bottom of the page. That's the first point where I was like, wait a minute, I think this is probably Larry Lieber. Because we've
Yeah.
seen a number of his alien characters back in the days when these superhero books were sharing space with bug-eyed alien stories. That just looks like a Larry Lieber alien there. They mention several times in this issue that Spider-Man has asbestos webbing.
Yes.
That webbing dissolves after an hour. So dissolves presumably means becomes gaseous. So I say once again, J. Jonah Jameson has been right this entire time. Spider-Man is absolutely a menace who is killing people, just not immediately.
Yep.
When we see a flashback of the Wizard, at one point, he is looking at a newsstand. There's a couple who are talking about Spider-Man being a public menace. He should be driven out of town. And the news seller says, I figure anyone can pull a boner. The changing meaning of the word boner through the years has always been entertaining.
Yeah, people love to share on the internet. There was like an all boner issue of Batman where it was like, the Joker and his boners. And it's like, I've got a plan that involves boners, Batman. And of course, we read this today and how we chuckle.
Yes. Well, I think lots of people today don't even know that boner used to mean either a practical joke or a screw up. Right? It could mean either one of those at various points in the past. And yeah, that's not what it means today. And especially pulling a boner. So at one point, Johnny says when Spider-Man breaks into his trailer, says, what in the name of a galloping guru do you think you're doing? So I'm thinking that this is the period of time when various celebrities are getting into Indian gurus at this point.
I guess that's true, yeah.
On page 20, final panel, when Mysterio is showing up to team up with the Wizard, Wizard says, because we have two enemies in common, Spider-Man and the Human Torch. It's like, no, you don't have them in common. They're gonna be in common in this issue, but you don't you have Spider-Man and then okay, fine. I'll just give you whatever. And at one point during that fight with Spider-Man and the Human Torch, Spider-Man says something about, big deal, I can dodge those things while reciting McLuhan backwards. And
well, speaking of Woody Allen, there's a great moment in the Woody Allen movie Annie Hall where he's listening to somebody pontificate about Marshall McLuhan when they're standing in line for a movie, and he says, if only this guy thinks he understands Marshall McLuhan. And finally Woody Allen brings the actual Marshall McLuhan out from behind a poster to say, you know nothing of my work, and then puts him back where he got him. So Marshall McLuhan was a media theorist who became quite popular as media theorists go, and had a book called The Medium is the Message.
Ah, okay. That's where that term comes from. Yeah. There's one point when things are going awry for the villains where the Wizard says, the time for stealth, for secrecy is past. We must attack and destroy. And Mysterio says, it's time for you to shut up and let me do the thinking for a while. Which I love.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it for me. Yeah, a rehash of plots that didn't need to be rehashed that went on a little too long.
Okay, let's quickly do some of the material at the end. They say, let's take a break as we visit the Coffee Bean Barn, and we have a 2-page spread of Pete and his whole supporting cast hanging out at their favorite underground coffee bean place in Greenwich Village. Once again, we see Flash, who is still on furlough and is wearing his blues when he should be wearing his greens, should be wearing an army outfit. Instead, he's wearing a Air Force or Navy outfit. I'm not sure which one. He is being flanked by Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy. Meanwhile, we see Harry and Pete. Pete is leaning against the jukebox, and for some reason, Aunt May and Anna Mae Watson, I always thought it was awkward that they both have May in their name. Aunt May and Anna Watson are both there as well. And Anna says, so this is where it's happening, May. And Aunt May says, cool it, sweetie. We don't want those cats to dig that we're hippies. And, which may be the first time I've read the word hippie in a Marvel comic book.
Yeah, good point.
There are two posters on the wall. There's a poster of Fu Manchu for mayor. Of course, later Marvel will license the character Fu Manchu and do comics about him. And then there's a picture of Woody Allen, and it says, support clean hobbits. Woody Allen lives, more or less. So absolutely obsessed with Woody Allen this issue. We have a couple more pages where we see how Spider-Man's outfit works, how his web fluid works. We see a page dedicated to sticking to walls.
And Larry Lieber really does a nice job with this whole section. I particularly like the page talking about him walking on walls, page 5 of this little section.
Yeah.
And in particular, the one where he's holding onto the wall by his hands and holding his body out horizontally. I am guessing he had some sort of photo reference of somebody doing a handstand for that, because it looks really, really nice.
It does.
In the feature where they're talking about Spider-Man's mask in particular, there's an arrow pointing at a picture of Spider-Man's head that says they're also available in shocking pink and morning after red.
Okay.
Yeah, that seems a little possibly risque, if that means what it sounds like it means. Who knows?
I don't know. Okay. So then several pages more devoted to his powers. There's a page where he is holding up on a platform everyone who is stronger than him in the Marvel Universe, which is a nicely done thing, although the Hulk is clearly lifted from someplace else.
I think all of them are. I think, well, I don't know, maybe not Thor, but I think
sure.
Most of them are. Yeah.
We have a 2-page spread of his villains that, if you had told me this was done by Reread, I would have believed you. Really nice looking 2-page spread of the villains. Then we have 2 pages of Peter Parker's pad. It says, finally, a visit to Petey's pad. Last we saw, Peter had been forced to pawn all of his scientific equipment in order to help save his aunt's life. But at some point, he has been back to the pawn shop and bought it all back, or has bought new versions, because we see that he has all sorts of scientific getup here, including his own microscope. And we get to see his closet full of high-speed film for camera and web fluid chemicals, wide angle and special camera lenses. Of course, he's usually not even touching his camera when he takes all of his award-winning photos, so I'm not sure how much special equipment he needs. But
well, I would think he would just put the wide angle on his camera and with the high-speed film, and then just set it to go, And the fact that he's using a wide angle lens might help explain how he can get some of these photos. He could just crop them, to get whatever he's supposed to get. I know that wouldn't actually explain it, but still.
Good point. Anyway, that's the end of the issue. It is a massive 55 pages of content. I get the feeling, did they just feel like the annuals weren't selling well enough because they had gotten a bad reputation for being mostly reprints? And so they're like, no, please spend the 25 cents. Please buy these annuals. We promise there won't be any reprints. I mean, it seems like one way or another, there's going to be filler. Either that filler is going to be the greatest stories of all time by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, or it's going to be a bunch of here's how sticking to walls works. You're going to have filler one way or another. You're not going to have an actual 55-page story. And if you're going to have filler, then why not have a great story? But I don't know. It's kind of cool, I guess, that they went ahead and are delivering so much content. But I'm not sure ultimately it was the best idea. How do you feel?
Yeah, and stretching out the actual primary story so much is, if you were thinking, they aren't selling well because there's so much padding, then all you're doing is you're spreading the padding out into the main story.
Yeah.
Which then makes the whole main story feel of less value. It's one thing if you had the main story be the normal 22 issues or something like that. Well, and as we'll see in the Fantastic Four one that we're going to get to presumably last today, there they've got a somewhat longer than usual story, a little bit of padding material, and then another 11-page story. And that really would be the way to do it. But that's not what they did on 3 out of the 4 of them.
No, they had overly padded main stories. That's true. So they finally admit at the end of the issue, it says, here's the senses-shattering scoop we promised you. This entire issue was passionately penciled and presumably plotted, I will say if I'm going to continue being alliterative, by none other than lovable Larry Lieber, our batty bullpen's blushing backup man. It says, and we want to tell you 1 year in advance that our 1968 Spidey special will feature the long-awaited mysterious saga of Peter Parker's parents. It'll be penciled by Laraping Larry and inked by old Ring-a-Ding himself. I think Ring-a-Ding that's John Romita?
Yeah, that would be Romita.
Okay.
Larapin? Larupin.
No, it's Larrupin.
Okay, once again, dyslexia. Yes.
Larrupin, Larry, and inked by old Ring-a-Ding himself, who it wouldn't be clear at all reading this who Ring-a-Ding is unless you happen to know that. it's really weird that they're planning that far in advance. And it's really weird that they already know what the plot of the next annual is going to be and that Larry's already working on it. Does it take Larry a year to do a comic? Granted, these are epic comics, but it's really weird that they've already plotted out the next annual. They've already hired him. They already know what he's working on. It's very strange. But anyway, that's it.
So I just looked it up. Larup means to thrash or whip someone.
Okay.
So I guess, does the two-gun kid have a bullwhip or something like that? Would that have something to do with anything? I don't know.
No idea.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to Avengers Annual 67. I will give you Fantastic Four.
Okay. Sounds good.
Once again, Avengers King Size Special, not a single reprint. The biggest continuous action epic ever in this, the Marvel Age of Comics. The original Avengers joined today's Avengers against 6 of the most mind-staggering villains of all time in a frantic 49-page free-for-all. The Mandarin, Power Man, the Living Laser, the Swordsman, the Enchantress, the Executioner. Bonus, pinups, biographies, plus a long-awaited, much-requested diagram of the fabulous Avengers mansions. We're going to get a nice cutaway view of Avengers Mansion.
Yes.
So, the Mighty Avengers, the monstrous master plan of the Mandarin. Stan Lee lovingly lords over a Roy Thomas Don Heck landmark of literary luminescence, inked by George Bell, lettered by Artie Simek. So we have the art super team of Don Heck and George Russos.
Yes.
Yes. So,
not a fan of either pencil or inker, and indeed I find the art in this issue to be mostly atrocious, as we will talk about as we go through it.
Matt, what do you think of Tony Stark's, as we would call it these days, less than lethal weapon to use in subduing prisoners and presumably, once they get the handheld versions, criminals on the street, or at least people who are accused of being criminals?
Well, of course, famously, they will eventually invent tasers in real life, which are named after the old Tom Swift novels, and Thomas A. Swift's electronic rifle became tasers. And we know that they eventually become problematic and that they're supposedly less than lethal, but they do occasionally kill people. And so there's all sorts of real life problems that are involved in things like this. But hey, as long as he's trying to revolutionize riot control methods. It's as harmless as tear gas and even more effective. Hey, he's trying, so yeah. I'm glad.
But painless, supposedly. Yeah, one thing we found over the years, though, is that once you have less than lethal methods, then they tend to get used a lot more often.
Yes.
So anyway, yeah, I was a little bit like, I don't know if we want to go down this road, but yeah, I can see that it would seem like a good idea at the time. So Stark is demonstrating this in a jail that happens to also contain the Living Laser, who has been able to reconstruct his lasers. Iron Man is having a battle with the Living Laser as he is trying to escape, and then the Living Laser just sort of vanishes. He just kind of vaporizes. Iron Man is like, I don't like the look of this. This seems like something the Mandarin would do. Like, does it? Does that seem like a Mandarin type thing? Would you think Mandarin when you see some other villain vaporize? I'm actually asking. Yeah.
I think Mandarin. Yeah, I could buy that he would think Mandarin. It's one of his main villains, and we've seen Mandarin teleport before. They were fighting Swordsman and Power Man, and they teleported away because the Mandarin did it. This seems believable enough to me.
Okay, so the Living Laser materializes in the Mandarin's headquarters or secret lair. Now, at some point, it is revealed that this is on a spaceship, but I sort of missed when that was mentioned. So at one point later on, they're just like, we're going to go up to the space station. We're like, wait. What? Mandarin has already gotten Swordsman, Executioner, Enchantress, and Power Man for this whole deal. They have already been recruited. And then...
once again, we have everybody trying to get on the Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1 action, because with this one, unlike in the Daredevil, we do have 6 old foes that are all being brought together, not as the Masters of Evil this time, as he might as well call them the Masters of Evil, but he doesn't. I guess they don't really have a name. Let's go ahead and call them the Honorary Masters of Evil.
Yeah. Mandarin brings in Submariner and says, now you will be part of my group too. And Submariner, of course, is not going to be having anything like this. So he confronts the Mandarin, and the Mandarin supposedly vaporizes him. Well, this is all a ruse. That was a hologram or something like that. And it just impresses the rest of them that he could have so much power that he could do this to the Submariner. The Mandarin reveals this gigantic, enormous, like larger than a group of humans, artificial diamond that somehow is going to become some sort of ultimate weapon when it's fueled by real diamonds. It makes absolutely no sense, but that's okay.
Sure.
On page 8, panel 2, who does Jarvis look like there, Matt?
Jack Nicholson?
Yes, thank you. He looks exactly like Jack Nicholson to me. So he's offering Iron Man tea. In a back and forth that I had with somebody on Facebook, we eventually came up with the dialogue of Iron Man saying, "I want the tea, Jarvis," and Jarvis says, "You can't handle the tea." So anyway,
I thought he would say, "I want you to take the tea and hold it between your legs."
Somebody else suggested that. Actually, he shows up at Avengers Mansion. Hercules, he's in their guest house. He's their Kato Kalin. He doesn't recognize Iron Man and so attacks him thinking he's an intruder. Thor then shows up and says, no, you're both supposed to be here. Oh, and Iron Man, by the way, had gone ahead and convened all of the old and new Avengers when he realized that Mandarin might be back. So they all show up, and then it just so happens that Nick Fury messages them while they are all together and tells them that there's something going on in South America, in Africa, and in the Asian subcontinent, which basically means India and Pakistan. So they're like, well, can S.H.I.E.L.D. do nothing? So S.H.I.E.L.D.'s an American combo, not a blamed international police force, because it's not like they have the word international in their acronym.
Excellent point. And it's been implied that they sort of spun out of the CIA, which CIA is not allowed to operate within the United States at all. It's only allowed to operate in foreign countries. So this makes no sense.
The Avengers determined that they are going to split up into 3 separate groups and head off to these 3 separate areas to defeat the 3 separate groups of bad guys. But Captain America and Quicksilver remain behind to act as a communication liaison and possible backup for folks. And it's interesting, we see 2 arrow cars heading out, and then separately we see Thor just using his hammer. And who is that behind him going with Thor? I forget who ends up with Thor in this whole thing. But neither of them have an arrow car. So, part 2, to perish by the sword. So with each of these chapters, it's got a little paper-clipped, ripped-off piece of note paper telling us what's going on. So from the files of the Mandarin to Swordsman and Power Man, one of the most progressive of South American nations, is also traditionally rich in diamonds. Are there any diamonds anywhere in South America? I don't know.
I don't know about that.
Swordsman and Power Man show up down there, and they've got some mercenaries with them, or maybe some Mandarin goons. Their whole plan is to destroy the capital city of this relatively rich, stable nation, or as they call it, a progressive nation, in South America, and therefore demoralize everybody by saying that if you try to make any progress, you're just going to get destroyed.
Pretty good art of a tank on page 13. Heck and Bell, I don't like the combo of in this issue, but I like their overhead drawing of a tank rumbling by on page 13. I'll give them that.
Sure. So, just the most bizarre thing. They end up with this giant, massive, city-sized scimitar that is somehow being levitated above the city, and they've got a little button that they can hit that will drop this scimitar, destroying the city. Of course, it would destroy one line of the city,
yes,
and the rest of the city would be left okay. And the song, The Sword of Damocles from Rocky Horror Picture Show, has been going through my head since I re-skimmed this morning in order to do this. So that's the best thing to come out of this particular issue, is making me think of that song. I don't need to get too much into what goes on here. Basically, the good guys end up thrashing the bad guys. Iron Man is able to use his repulsor rays. Oh, yeah, so this is Iron Man and Giant Man here, or Goliath.
And Wasp.
And Wasp, thank you. Which is interesting because Power Man takes on the name Goliath in the 80s.
Yes.
Iron Man uses his repulsor rays to let the scimitar down very... Well, he was trying to stop it from hitting the city. It was coming down somewhat gently, but then he's able to finally throw it off into the jungle. They're mopping up and getting Swordsman and Power Man, and at one point the Swordsman says, "Yes, when all of so-called civilization lies in crumbling, flaming ruins." I'm like, Swordsman, civilization is where you keep all your stuff. That is not a good idea. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, moving on to part 3. From the files of the Mandarin, many of the largest diamonds on the planet are to be found in the Asian subcontinent. Now, that, I believe, is not untrue. Therefore, this area must be secured by the Executioner and the Enchantress. Part 3, Struggle in a Strange Land. Now, one thing I find interesting here, and I'm going to double check this with you in the original coloring. I am on Marvel Unlimited with the digitally recolored issues. The inhabitants of the subcontinent here, essentially Indian or Pakistani or Bangladeshi people, what skin tone are they?
Just Caucasian.
Yep, they're pink, which I find interesting. It's like, that's one thing where it's like, no, you do have tones that aren't like racist looking that you could use that might be a little bit more appropriate. I mean, I know that maybe in the north there might be people who look a little bit more, well, but even then they wouldn't have a pink tone to their skin. I don't know. It bugs me a little bit.
It's probably for the best, given all the ways they could have screwed it up.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Executioner and Enchantress here are facing off against Hercules and Scarlet Witch. Executioner and Enchantress also have an army of Asgardian trolls that they are bringing into this whole thing. And Don Heck shows the trolls as being like waist high. I don't believe the trolls are shown as being small miniature people in the Thor books, are they?
No, certainly not.
Yeah. And Executioner is wearing that helmet that we haven't seen since his first appearance, but, sure, fine. In the middle of all this, there is some weird stuff that goes on with Hercules and Scarlet Witch perhaps having some kind of romantic tension, and then the Enchantress having a thing for Hercules and wanting to kill Scarlet Witch because Hercules seems to be attracted to Scarlet Witch. I'm like, I don't think you need to give Enchantress this kind of motivation.
No.
They somehow transport themselves with the Executioner's dimensional blade into some abandoned city, that is hovering on the abyss between what has been and the never shall be, which is a little bit odd. I'm like, okay, sure, why not?
Sure.
There's a frost giant that is conjured at one point that can't be beat by anyone who isn't an Asgardian. So Hercules, very cleverly, I like this, grabs the Executioner and uses the Executioner as a projectile weapon against this frost giant. Thereby fulfilling the prophecy that only an Asgardian can destroy it.
Yeah, that's really great. I hadn't put together that's what he was doing there. That's great.
Finally, part 4, and a monster shall stalk the land. From the files of the Mandarin. Africa is the richest of all continents in the diamonds which I need. This area the living laser must conquer for me with the help of my most powerful minion of all. And again, this is a little bit weird. There seem to be more white people than black people, which would seem to indicate South Africa, but the fact that there are black people mixed in with the white people would seem to not be that. It's a little bit like, what's going on here, people?
Yeah.
So we have a big fight with Thor and Hawkeye fighting on one side and the living laser fighting on the other. We have not found out yet who the other secret weapon of the Mandarin is until eventually Ultimo comes out of a volcano. I don't remember, when was the last time we saw Ultimo?
Somewhere in an Iron Man comic. So I got to say, this is my favorite part of this comic. It says on the cover, here are the 6 villains we're going to be fighting. And it's like, okay, find another issue fighting these 6 villains. And one by one, the Avengers are fighting them and they're defeating them. And it's like, okay, we're on page 31 at this point. And then suddenly Ultimo shows up. And it's like, wow, that's a big villain who was a major challenge for Iron Man. I did not expect him to show up. He was not on the cover. This is a big escalation of the story. And it's great that Thor gets to fight Ultimo because that's a worthy villain for Thor. And if we're going to be reading this epic story, it's nice if you're going to have to get to page 34 of a comic, any comic, to have a big unforeseen escalation happen at that point. And I was glad to see Ultimo show up.
Yeah, and the art team does a decent job with Ultimo. He looks rather Colan-esque.
Yeah.
I will give them that. At one point, Ultimo, something with his powers, are able to neutralize Mjolnir so that it won't return to Thor's hand. So he's, of course, now got 60 seconds. He's still fighting Ultimo. And then it gets right down to, they actually have a countdown, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, as Thor is flinging himself for Mjolnir. And he doesn't get there in time. And so then we see Don Blake's not entirely able body tumbling down a rather steep, rough incline until he reaches what is now, well, actually, it's unclear whether that's his walking stick or Mjolnir in that particular form. But he's able to grab it and turn back into Thor, which, once again, I find a nice, interesting thing that we haven't seen before. Right? With him turning back into Don Blake and then mid-action and then still being able to get back to being Thor. Also, I do wonder whether there are some colon swipes in this fight with Ultimo here. Some of these things look a little too colon-esque. But one way or the other, they're finally able to bury Ultimo under a rock slide. So, final thing, part 5, Showdown in Space. So we go back to Captain America and Quicksilver, who are back at Avengers Mansion. They somehow, I guess, have figured out that the lair is up in the space station, so they're able to take a rocket and head up and somehow be able to dock with the space station. Or I guess it really is more like a ship there. But once again, it's very much like, hey, what happens when you get to the submarine and you need to get inside of it? Well, never mind that. They're just gonna get inside. I do like how Mandarin, the inside of the spaceship, looks on page 41.
Yeah.
Looks very much like his style. So Captain America and Quicksilver are fighting Mandarin, and then somehow the rest of the Avengers are all able to teleport there, or maybe not teleport, maybe they've flown in and gotten in through another airlock, it's unclear, but they all show up, and Mandarin is somehow showing off his big fancy synthetic diamond, and talking about how it's going to power this weapon that will destroy the Earth, or something.
Well, he's creating a hate ray that's going to make everybody hate each other, and then he tries it out on the Avengers, so then he turns all the Avengers against each other, and we get splash page on page 45 of all the Avengers fighting each other because they've been affected by the hate ray. However, then somebody knocks out Mandarin. Who is it? It's the Wasp. The Wasp has unexpectedly saved the day. Why? Because she somehow was smarter or quicker or more clever or a better fighter than the rest of the team? No, the Mandarin just forgot that everybody is going to be hatefully attacking somebody, and he didn't realize how close the Wasp was to him, and she was the one who was sort of blindly turned to hatefully attack somebody, and she attacked Mandarin and turned off the hate ray accidentally. Heaven forbid the Wasp should actually save the day by her own willpower in any way, shape, or form.
Well, she does from time to time, but yes, very good point. But I actually did find that to be a nice irony that Mandarin said, everybody will hate each other so much they will fight each other. And then it's like, oh crap, that includes me. Which I find kind of nice. But yes, thank you. I was just trying to get through this thing, and had forgotten that detail. So there is a hole blown in the wall of the spaceship, and Mandarin is sucked outside, and nobody can do anything quickly enough, and so they just end up plugging the hole with the synthetic diamond, which apparently just seals it all up. They're able to just hang out on the spaceship now for a little bit. And by the way, years later in the 80s, I know that I remembered seeing Thor flying around with no sort of suit in space. He could have flown out and saved the Mandarin.
True.
He just decided not to. Anyway, so they then decide, the Avengers, that they have to destroy this spaceship because it would be too valuable to any other villains that might get their hands on it. Of course, if it were in the hands of the Western nations, presumably it would not get in their hands. But whatever, they go ahead and blow it up and head on back to Earth, where they are then later feted on Avengers Day in the episode that we talked about in the previous issue.
Yes.
So, that was a lot. This one was longer than the other ones.
Even longer, yes. A 49-page story. I think there's things I like about this issue. I like having, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I like having 9 Avengers versus what turns out to be 7 villains. Makes for a lot of value that you're getting for your 25 cents. And all of the villains are characterized well. All of the heroes are characterized well. Roy is doing a pretty good job with everyone's dialogue. I've been criticizing the art. The art is not as atrocious as it could be, but the plot is ultimately fairly rote. nothing out of the standard sort of plotting that you would expect anybody to write, or any, for that matter, kid to come up with himself. But this is not a terrible issue. But oh my gosh, I just read the whole thing. I'm like going, oh, if only jaunty John Buscema had penciled this issue, it would have been 1,000 times better.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, and also if it had been 10 pages shorter, I'm sure that they could have tightened everything up nicely.
Yeah.
Just a couple things that I'm going to go back and mention. Yeah. So once again, we've talked about this foreshadowing. When they're leaving the ship and heading back home, Henry Pym says, "I'm a biochemist, not a space scientist." Yes, once again, you're a biochemist. Remember that. A biochemist. Not a roboticist.
Yes.
Not an AI scientist. A biochemist.
By the way, I was just saying that Heck and Russo's aren't as bad as they could be, but look at Captain America's star on page 49. How hard is it to draw a star? You just draw the 5 lines and then erase the middle of it, but none of the lines match up on that star. It's pretty atrocious.
Yeah, well, and, there was also a close-up on the Enchantress's face where it looks like she got way overzealous with the smoky eye.
Yeah.
Yes, there are a lot of things to criticize art-wise in this issue, but it wasn't bad overall.
Yeah.
So, shall we move on to the stuff in the back?
Yep, let's do it.
So we have a pinup of Hercules, which is relatively unremarkable, and then we have the cutaway view of Avengers Mansion, which is pretty standard. We see that a lot of those high-tech rooms that we see them hanging out in are in basements, which makes a lot more sense than having them just be on street level. However, I do think we've seen people walking into them from street level before, so maybe not. Okay, we then get a pinup of the Black Widow, Wasp, and Scarlet Witch, another pinup of the old Avengers and the new Avengers, and then we get a couple little essays from Don Heck and Roy Thomas in the back, which we don't need to go into here because we're way into these things at this point.
I think these are in a different order than yours are, so I don't know what you're referring to.
Bombastic Bullpen Biography Department by Don Heck by Roy Thomas.
That's not at the end of my issue. Okay. I've scrolled back and I found it.
Anyway, I did not bother to read these. Once again, I was already kind of worn out.
I'm just scanning through it right now. I see the Roy Thomas one ends. In closing, may I state that I'm a simple guy with but 3 goals in life: to write the longest story in the Marvel Age of Comics, which of course he does in this issue, so that's a joke, to marry Bridget Bardot and or the Black Widow, and to star in a film biography of Woody Allen. So
more Woody Allen. That's going to age really well.
Yes, constant Woody Allen this month, or this year of annuals. Okay, Steve, let's go ahead and finish things up with Fantastic Four King Size Special number 5. All new, not a single reprint, just like the others, featuring the Inhumans, the Black Panther, and a most surprising announcement from Mr. Fantastic. Shouldn't that be an announcement from Sue?
Yeah,
isn't she the one who really
so.
has the news? Oh, and by the way, we have a great new villain too. Special bonus, The Silver Surfer, a complete feature full-length thriller. As you might imagine from this cover, a rather packed issue. So we have continued to gone back and forth as to whether or not Kirby has been bringing his A game since the end of Fantastic Four number 60 and the end of his greatest era. Is he still introducing great villains? I think the Psycho Man is a great villain. I love the look of the Psycho Man. What do you think of the look of the Psycho Man?
I love the design of the Psycho Man. I think he looks fantastic. That being said, the art generally in this issue, I was actually thinking, yeah, I can see that people would say that this is when they've sort of passed the absolute peak of what they were doing. Some of the art in this issue I'm not particularly fond of, or at least not to the degree that I have been in the past. Grading on the very high curve.
I didn't really have a problem with Kirby or Sinnott's rendering in this issue, but boy, the storytelling gets confusing. So I was hoping you would end up doing Fantastic Four because boy, am I confused about some of the stuff that's going to happen this issue, but I will just have to wing it. We begin with Divide and Conquer, another spellbinding spectacular by Stan Lee and Jack King Kirby, inking by Jolton Joe Sinnott, lettered by Swing and Sammy Rosen. So Sue has fainted and nobody knows why. Of course, In reality, being pregnant doesn't really make you faint very often. I will go ahead and spoil what's going on. It takes a while for it to come out in the issue, but Sue is pregnant. So I'd remembered her getting pregnant like right away after they get married, which tends to happen a lot in comic strips. Literally, it was less than like 2 months after Lil Abner got married that Daisy May got pregnant. It was just a couple months after Dick Tracy got married that Tess Trueheart got pregnant. And again, there's this idea we've talked about a long time ago on this podcast that, well, if they're married, they might be having sex and they can't be having recreational sex. They've got to be having sex with a purpose. They've got to be doing something worthwhile with all this sex that they must be having. So they've got to get pregnant right away, even though it really makes no sense for this book to have Sue and Reed have a kid. There will be constant issues for the next 50 years, 60 years of stories of who is taking care of Franklin, but this is a road they choose to go down right here. They're all trying to revive Sue. Sue is still not telling the news. Meanwhile, we get to a villain called the Psycho Man, who has a little remote control that has, in big letters on it, fear, doubt, hate. And each one's got a little button next to it. And he presses the little button and he hits you with a ray that makes you be overcome with fear or doubt or hate. I would think you want more emotions to choose from rather than have these emotions be written in such large letters on his remote control. I would think he would want like little tiny buttons with 30 different emotions to choose from. This is sort of like a Roku remote here where it's got 4 streaming services gone ahead and burned into the remote.
Maybe he doesn't want to accidentally hit love or compassion or something like that, when he meant to do fear or hate. He just wants to have them right there. I cannot make a mistake. I get the one that I want.
So then we see the Psycho Man. He goes ahead and hits his fear button and he shoots one of his own goons with it. And really gorgeous art from Kirby and Senat. We don't see the creature he is imagining attacking him. We just see the shadows of its tentacles falling across him. And he is so terrified, he leaps out the window way above the city and seemingly falls to his death. But as always, whenever Jack King Kirby decides to kill somebody off, Stan Lee always swoops in to save the guy's life. And so then Stan Lee has the Psycho Man say, he landed on the ledge below. When he recovers in the hospital, no one will believe his story. They'll think he's mad. Sure, Stan.
Yeah, this guy went shooting out of the window. If he's going to hit a ledge, it's going to be on the building across the street.
Yes, and he will still go splat.
Yes.
So then Psycho Man turns to 3 new goons, Livewire, Ivan, and Shellshock, and they start turning on him, but then he's like, okay, I'll hit you with the Doubt Ray. Still more great art on page 5 by Kirby and Senat of the 3 of them crippled with doubt and sort of writhing on the floor while the Psycho Man calmly walks away. They then realize that they've accidentally shipped one of their components to Alicia's apartment. Alicia constantly getting mixed up in the Avengers, the Fantastic Four by sheer coincidence. Alicia has called Ben over to deal with it, but then Ben gets hit by the Fear Ray, seemingly from behind, and imagines himself fighting a giant monster, and then sort of again collapses on the ground, sort of consumed by fear. The Psycho Man shows up with his goons and takes off with the component. We then get a book that is just driven by massive coincidences. The Black Panther has bought himself an island. Let's visit Panther Island, so named for the billionaire Wakanda chieftain who has just purchased it. Is this the first time the word billionaire has been used in Marvel Comics? It may be.
I don't know.
Billionaire is obviously a relatively new thing at the time. It turns out the Black Panther has bought himself an island. Whoops. The Inhumans are living on that island. They're always on the run. They're always making their way around the world doing various things. And they're on this island right now. So then the Fantastic Four and the Inhumans get into a big fight that lasts for several pages. It is well drawn. It is very well penciled and inked by Kirby and Sinan. It's fun to watch these people battle each other. Black Bolt then shows up and figures out they shouldn't be fighting each other. But then the book takes a bizarre turn where suddenly Black Bolt, who you remember cannot speak, so always just has to make vague gestures with his hands, he's figured out something. But what has he figured out? We don't know. And then suddenly he's like, let's go out to this island and all.
An island off the coast of the island, like a little rocky outcropping.
And then they're like, wait, we have to go and we have to break into the little thing that's inside it. And seemingly inside is the Psycho Man. So this is a massive coincidence. A bunch of our supporting characters have randomly run into each other. The Black Panther has run into the Inhumans, and then they both seemingly realize, oh, also on this island where we've convened is the Psycho Man, our villain, who we have no reason to fight, is also here, and let's fight him. Am I missing something here, Steve?
Nope. You got it. That is exactly what's going on. A couple of things I want to point out while you've thrown it to me for a moment. The Psycho Man's henchmen, they are named Livewire, Ivan, and Shell Shock. Livewire is surprisingly the cowboy-looking guy who has some kind of electrical lariat and some kind of electrical gun. Ivan and Shell Shock, they both just seem to have guns. I'm not sure what's going on with them at all. Black Panther refers to the people of the Wakandas once again, which we have seen at one point in the past. In terms of Black Bolt somehow creating this bridge on top of the water through some kind of electrical, blast of molecular energy. What are his powers?
Yeah.
He does anything and everything. It's one of the things where the Inhumans are really cool at first glance, but the closer you look, the more of a problem the characters are to write, I would think.
Yes, as in how do you solve a problem like the Inhumans? Yes, it is a problem. And in fact, they will never...
They'll never square that circle.
They're never going to sustain a good comic book or a TV show ever. But
I'm going to get you to watch that TV show one of these days.
You're going to get me to watch that.
I've got to share the misery with somebody. Also, I've done research on it to figure out why it was so bad that I want to be able to share at some point.
Okay, so then meanwhile, Reed and Sue decide to finally reveal what's going on to Ben, Alicia, Crystal, and Johnny. They reveal that Sue is pregnant and she's going to have a baby. And Ben begins his career of being a great uncle right away by just getting really joyous and really beautiful art on page 14 of how joyous Ben is as he picks up Reed and flings him around.
I love this.
Everybody is very, very happy. Of course, do we ever really get to see Sue pregnant? She's pregnant for a year because she gives birth in the next annual, in annual number 6. But certainly I don't recall seeing her like fully pregnant because in fiction, generally, certainly in TV or movies, you never get to see someone who is like 9 months pregnant. But I don't recall ever seeing Sue looking very pregnant at all. I'm currently reading the comics with her tragic second pregnancy in it to my son, and she gets to look pretty pregnant in those, but not in these. All of our characters, for no reason, come together. Really, nothing is driving this whole story. The Inhumans and Black Panther are fighting the Psycho Man in his headquarters. Suddenly, the Fantastic Four are just there as well. Is it just Ben and Johnny? Just Ben and Johnny are just there as well. No indication of how they found out. You know, we'd seen Ben finding the Psycho Man. No indication of how they have then tracked him down to the lair. If they are surprised to see, like, Black Panther and the Inhumans, what are you guys doing here? No indication of them being surprised about that.
I think they have something in there about Lockjaw transports them there, and somehow Lockjaw was able to figure out where they needed to go. So,
but in the past, we've seen Lockjaw be particularly bad at figuring out where people need to go. But
it's not a bad point.
They are all seemingly attacked by a giant creature, although presumably this is just something that they're imagining due to the Psycho Ray's rays. The Black Panther, always seen as someone who is more on the ball than everybody else, quickly figures out what's going on. He also has to fight a creature for a while, but then figures out that he can get the jump on the Psycho Man. Everybody is battling. We see the Psycho Man tell us that he is actually from Subatomica, the universe that exists within molecules of our universe that we've seen before and we'll see again. I don't know.
Did he ever show up in the pages of the Micronauts?
He did, yes.
Okay, yeah, that would make sense.
I don't know why they felt like that should be part of his character as opposed to like an alien from outer space, or I guess it's just a different way of doing things. Like, oh, let's have him show up from Subatomica instead of showing up as an alien from outer space. Why not? The Black Panther finally gets the drop on Psycho Man, jumps on him, clobbers him. Everyone realizes they've just been fighting illusions created by the Psycho Man's thing. Then Ben says at the end, there's a heck of a lot wrong with this nutty old planet, but it's ours just the same. And if anybody else tries to muscle in, no matter who, no matter how, we'll clobber them or we'll go down trying. Enough said. So this story is all over the map. This is a very generic ending to a comic. There is no sense of anything they have learned today. I love the Psycho Man's look. I love his emotion controlling machine. I like the idea that they're all fighting each other. I like the Inhumans when they're under the control of Kirby and Senat. I like the Black Panther. I love the Black Panther. I love a lot of stuff about this issue. It is the best of these 4 annuals, but it is still a mess. And we're not done with it, but do you have anything else to say about this first story?
Yeah, well, you were talking about the Black Panther being referenced as a billionaire, and I'm like, I don't really like the idea of my country having a billionaire be its absolute autocrat.
Yes. Indeed.
That's an idea I don't like. So,
Yeah.
note to everybody, I don't like that. And then also, when put together with Black Bolt, who is once again another absolute autocrat of his people, and they're like all respecting each other, and I'm like, don't love it. It's, you know. Yeah, so at one point they describe Black Bolt as having an indescribable electron force. Again, what? I don't know. One of these characters, I don't know whether it's Ivan or the other guy, whatever their names are, Ivan or Shellshock, has a gun that he's shooting, and then he's able to just sort of pull a little missile out of nowhere and stick it in the nozzle of his gun and shoot it somewhere. Psycho Man is about to shoot off his world-spanning hate ray, but then it's destroyed by Black Bolt, and there is a speech balloon coming from off-panel. Holy cow, that gimmicky ray of yours clobbered the... I guess clobbered means it's probably a thing. That gimmicky ray of yours clobbered the gun before he could squeeze the trigger. And I'm like, what gimmicky ray? Is this Black Bolt? Has some sort of gimmicky... I don't know what we're talking about here. It's a bit confused, and yeah, the art is starting to head in the direction of some of the Kirby art that we'll be getting as we head into the 70s and then, God forbid, into the 80s. Just starting to have some of that creep in. Well, in terms of rendering and anatomy, if you go back to the page where Thing is just ecstatic about becoming a pseudo-uncle, or I guess actually they invite him to be the godfather, look at Reed's knee that's pointing towards us right there.
Yeah, I guess I can see that.
That's what I'm seeing start to creep in. So for our listeners who aren't looking at this, it's like got just sort of almost kind of random lines describing the knee. It doesn't really seem to be describing any sort of real human anatomy there. And it looks like it's starting to morph into that everything has the shiny silver surfery like kind of texture to it thing that we end up getting in the 70s and in the 80s. And so yeah, it's not huge. I think if I were reading this at the time, it wouldn't necessarily jump out at me, but having grown up with that Kirby art as the stuff that I was most familiar with, this is starting to reflect a little bit of that to me.
I guess I can see what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess we made it through.
No, we've still got a ton left of this annual.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, we do. We still have another whole story. Never mind. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit that.
Once again, comic about Stan called This Is a Plot, in which case they make a big deal about how this is actually written and penciled by Kirby, inked by Giacoya. I think this may be the first time we've seen Giacoya inking Kirby. And we see them all going crazy around the bullpen and having fun playing with each other. For the first time, we see Kirby drawing Roy Thomas, who later he will sort of cruelly caricature in his New Gods comics, along with his sort of cruel caricature of Stan, and will hurt Roy Thomas's feelings when he does so. It's a fun story. I'm just going to zip through it. Stan and Jack are having a lot of fun going crazy in the bullpen, and then they end up in Traction in a full body cast by the end of it. Again, sort of maintaining this sort of fiction that Jack and Stan work together in the Marvel offices, which was never the case, that Jack was very much working remotely at this point from his own studio and his own home, I believe. But they'd sort of had this polite fiction that they all worked in the office because they just decided that'd be more fun for people to read about. Any thoughts on this story?
The splash page really reminds me once again of Steve Rude when he started entering his Kirby phase, particularly Stan in that splash page there.
Yeah.
If you had just shown me that figure isolated and told me that that was Steve Rude, I would have believed you.
Yeah.
And yeah, Kirby keeps on drawing Stan and Jack as different characters in each of the panels. And it's like panel by panel by panel, there are two different pairs of characters. And he pulls it off very nicely. That could very easily be a storytelling mess, but it works out quite well. He's able to pull it off very nicely. I do notice that at one point, when they are two different characters, they are both Germans, which is a little bit odd. Jack Kirby looks like he is being portrayed as a World War I German. Stan Lee is being portrayed as a Nazi, which is specifically saying, Schwein, you would defy your Führer? Which, yeah, that's interesting.
Indeed it is.
especially for like where their relationship probably was at this point and where it would eventually go. So, yeah, figured I'd just point that out. I also believe this might possibly be the first use of the word psychedelic in a Marvel comic.
Huh.
On the splash page, it says it's only 3 psychedelic pages. And so if Jack Kirby is writing this, that means he is the one who's bringing this in, which does remind me of a story that Mom has told of one time when Grandma was describing something that was really neat as being psychedelic, and the kids were all just like, "Oh, Mom, no, you can't say that." Yeah, you know, trying to be hep, trying to be like the kids these days. So, all right, so why don't you go ahead and finish up the rest of the...
Okay, great to see Jack Kirby occasionally get a writing credit. We could spend more time on this story. It's a lot of fun, but we're going to keep moving on. Okay, in the back, we have full-page pinups of Black Bolt, Gorgon, Medusa, Karnak, Triton, Crystal, Maximus the Mad, a big collage of various villains. We've got a great 2-page spread of the Fantastic Four with the Thing on rocket-powered, flying roller skate type things.
I will point out that wasn't all villains. The page with the villains also includes Silver Surfer, Watcher, Lockjaw, Wyatt Wingfoot, Black Panther, and Alicia.
I'm just trying to get through the issue, Steve. I'm just okay. Desperately trying to get through this issue. It's been a long episode, man. So then finally, just when you think you are too exhausted to continue, we have another 12-page story crammed into the back of this issue. The Peerless Power of the Silver Surfer, also representing the uncanny Quasimodo, a Stan the Manly and Jack King Kirby Powerhouse presentation, inked by Frank Giacoia, lettered by Artie Simek. So we got a whole story here of Giacoia inking Kirby. Not as good as Sinnott, but not bad. Sort of a more Bigfoot inking style, more of sort of clunky, big, thick black lines. Almost sort of Al Milgram-ish, but I like it better than Al Milgram. But in terms of the heaviness of the brush, it's kind of like Al Milgram. What do you think of the inking?
It didn't jump out at me particularly, but I can see what you're saying, yeah. Less of a cursive line and more of like a big, fat, deadweight line around the figures here. In certain situations, at least. Yeah.
Once again, the Silver Surfer is flying along, trying to mind his own business. He's enjoying flying around with some ducks, and then hunters are shooting at the ducks. And this causes Silver Surfer to once again pontificate about how self-destructive mankind is. Then the Silver Surfer flies to New York, where he encounters Quasimodo, the Mad Thinker's living computer, who we last saw in annual number 4 1 year ago. Now, of course, at that time, Quasimodo was out in the middle of the desert. Now he's in New York City. He seemingly got moved to New York City at some point, but is still bolted to the floor and not happy about it and wishing he could be free. Well, then the Silver Surfer hears his cries somehow, flies down there, and he's like, "Oh, you want to be free? Okay, I'll go ahead and create you a little robot body." And then Quasimodo's like, "Hey, thanks. I could just wait until you leave and then begin on my career of destruction. But no, well, you're still here. Now I can tell you why I'm called Quasimodo. I was created for one purpose alone, programmed to do but one thing. My name stands for Quasi-Motivational Destruct Organ, and my mission is to destroy." And then he attacks the Silver Surfer. Again, all he had to do was wait for the Silver Surfer to leave. But no, he attacks Silver Surfer, smashes his way out of his basement he's been living in, starts rampaging through the streets. And then the Silver Surfer is like, dude, I am a lot more powerful than you. And I will go ahead and fight you for a couple of pages, and then I'll get bored with it, and I'll go ahead and turn you into a statue on top of a clock, which he does. If a body lack a soul, only a statue can it be. And he flies off, and it says, "Fini." So I'm glad to have this story. I like having the Silver Surfer. This is seemingly sort of a tryout for the Silver Surfer getting his own book, which he will get in about 6 months, I think. I liked Quasimodo as a villain. It's fun to have him back. It's fun to have him finally get a body and be able to run around a little bit. I liked this story just fine. What did you think of this story?
Yeah, overall, I found it nice to bring Quasimodo back and to have it be sort of like the fable of the frog and the scorpion here. That, you know, the frog rescues the scorpion and the scorpion kills the frog, even though it means his own destruction. In this case, obviously, Silver Surfer is not killed, but attacks the frog even though it will mean his own destruction. And it's like, why did you do it? Because it's my nature. So it felt a little bit like that. I noticed that Silver Surfer, at one point when he's talking about the hunters hunting the ducks, he says, "In all the universe, only here do wanton beings slay innocent creatures in the name of sport." It's like, okay, there are so many things wrong with that sentence.
Yes.
A, there are galaxy-spanning empires. You do not create galaxy-spanning empires without slaying innocent creatures. I guess maybe it's not sport, but I mean, come on. You're going to have them doing that. The second thing is, yeah, when they're hunters, they're probably going to be eating these things. Right?
Yes.
That's not, and yes, they're doing it for sport in that they could go ahead and just buy it in a store, but that's probably going to be even worse for the ducks. So I have a little bit of a problem with the way he has a problem with this here, although he might just not know all of that. Also, just the whole idea of how they thought about computers and things like that back then versus what we know about how the computers were back then. Quasimodo at one point thinks he forgets that my brain can think and plan with the speed of an electronic calculator. Hence, he is the one who is vulnerable. I'm like, yeah, calculators weren't very fast back then.
No.
And the final thing was on page 8, panel 3, we see a Kirby panel with no backgrounds that was not inked by Coletta, which sort of jumps out at me. And I wonder whether that is evidence that occasionally he would draw panels without backgrounds, or whether Frank Giacoia was like, I'm going to take a page out of Vince Coletta's book and just not do this background. I'm not sure. Anyway, yeah, that's about it. Nice little short story. I like that it's a lot tighter and a lot less hard to follow than the previous story in this book.
All right, everybody, we have covered more content in this episode than we have ever covered before. We covered 220 pages, but we wanted to not take too long of a break from our normal monthly book, so we are crammed it all into this supersized episode. Thanks for staying with us. We had 4 annuals. The Fantastic Four was definitely the best of them. Daredevil was definitely the worst, and Spider-Man and the Avengers being somewhere in between. I'm glad we didn't have a guest on for these. We had too much to get through. Having fun with a guest is a luxury we did not have time for. But I think that this was still a lot of fun, and hopefully you guys at home have just as much fun when we poke fun as you do when we have fun reading the books.
Well, thank you, everybody. We always appreciate having your ear. Pay attention to the stuff in the closing credits if you want to find us or if you want to give us a tip. And that is it. Take care and stay safe out there.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, we now have a Patreon where you can show your appreciation. If you've got a few bucks, head over to patreon.marvelrereadclub.com to support us. Also, you can still rate and review us at your podcatcher of choice, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. You can find us online at marvelrereadclub.com, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. See you next time.